Revenge with Karen.
I knew something was off when the cleaning crew called me ma'am 3 times in one breath. Not Patricia, not Miss Lang. Just that drawn-out Midwest passive-aggressive ma'am that means they've been warned not to get involved. I was halfway through my morning checklist: remote badge disablement, privilege reconciliation, minor flag on an expired API cert, when I noticed a red sticky note on my desk. Calvin's Chicken Scratch. Need to chat. Boardroom. 9:30 sharp. Bring your smiling face with smiling eyes. No signature. Just a smiley face from a man who once asked if compliance was just a fancier kind of HR. That's how the day started. That's how the fuse got lit. My desk was always quiet. A gray slab of steel tucked near the server access door, where no one bothered you unless something broke. I liked it that way. My tea never went cold, and the hum of the cooling units helped me think. Every day at 8:06 a.m., I logged in. Not because I was told to, but because systems don't wait. They don't whine, they don't flatter. They just reflect truth, like mirrors with better memory. That morning, everything was status quo on the surface. Emails flowed like usual. A badge escalation request from distribution that I rejected without ceremony. Quarterly audit ping from our federal vendor I already pre-filled because I actually read the MSA clauses. And then there was Calvin, walking past my desk, grinning like he just pitched a podcast. His cologne smelled like department store ego and citrus-flavored bad ideas. Now's probably a good time to say, hey, if you're enjoying this, or at least side-eyeing it while sipping your sad breakroom coffee, tap that subscribe button or like it. Seriously, 95% of folks never do, but it helps our little rebellion keep the lights on. Plus, it makes the intern smile. He thinks this is how revolutions start. Anyway, back to Calvin. He was a transplant from some sun-kissed tech incubator where job titles have the word evangelist in them. The kind of guy who orders almond milk for the optics, then sneaks half and half from the fridge. Calvin arrived 6 months ago like a thunderclap of high fives and corporate jargon. Within 3 weeks, he'd reassigned half the org chart and started referring to himself as Director of Transformation in emails, even though no one approved that title. I watched. I documented. I changed nothing on the outside, but in my private access logs, I flagged 2 changes. First, Calvin had granted himself read-only credentials to our audit portal. Not illegal, just interesting. Second, he added an internal culture liaison position directly below him. That position hadn't existed before. It now technically outranked me. I didn't argue. I adjusted. I re-verified the role mapping matrix, version 2.2, and saved a clean snapshot in 3 locations, including a cold archive. Not because I feared him, but because I knew men like him always underestimated women like me. For the next month, my direct reports were shuffled. First, Mia, the sharp one, was invited to a cross-functional initiative under Calvin's umbrella. Then Jamal was moved to IT infrastructure for better alignment. Then it was just me. No goodbye lunches, no explanations, like I was being slowly dissolved in lukewarm water. Still, I played the part. Tea at 8:05. Login at 8:06. My smile became thinner, but my memory became sharper. Calvin kept pushing new buzzwords into team meetings, synergy audits, persona mapping, narrative hygiene. I kept approving access tickets and maintaining the only thing that actually kept this logistics company from being fined into oblivion, our compliance grid. Here's the thing about systems, especially ones tied to federal vendors. They need a named officer for accountability. A real human, not a placeholder title. Someone whose digital identity is cryptographically bonded to the attestation keys. That person was me. It had been me for the past 7 years, not just by function, but by protocol. And yet, every time Calvin talked about our compliance evolution, he mentioned platforms and culture, but never people. Definitely not me. I started noticing little erasures. My name disappeared from monthly update decks. Access logs showed attempts to probe admin-level directories I had sealed years ago. One day, I found my chair missing. No explanation, just gone. I stood for 8 hours without complaint, typed my reports, drank my tea, bought a folding stool the next day. He was testing me, or forgetting me, or both. Then came the sticky note. Need to chat. Boardroom, 9:30 sharp. Bring your smiling face with smiling eyes. I took one last sip of tea, logged my final badge audit for the morning. Then stood, grabbed my ID, and walked toward the boardroom like a woman heading for her own funeral, with excellent posture and absolutely no intention of dying. What Calvin didn't know was that the moment he picked up his pen to draw a new org chart, he was already out of compliance, and I was just waiting for him to hand me the match. It happened on a Thursday, which already felt like a slap. Thursday is too close to Friday to matter, and too far from Monday to deserve a disaster. But Calvin, in his infinite performative wisdom, picked 2:00 p.m., the sleepy dead zone where caffeine fades and no one's sharp, for his little announcement. The invite had come with a subject line that sounded like a TED talk, but smelled like a pink slip: structural evolution and culture alignment. It started with snacks. Always does. Corporate executions get dressed up in trail mix and La Croix. Calvin stood in front of the flat screen, sleeves rolled up like he was prepping to paint a fence, grinning like he'd just reinvented sliced bread. Behind him, a pastel-colored PowerPoint slide with words like agility, modernity, and human synergy. The slide changed, and with it, the hierarchy. In our pursuit of a leaner, more collaborative tomorrow, Calvin began, reimagining how leadership functions. Titles are outdated. Hierarchies limit innovation. So we're moving toward a more fluid, role-based structure, effective immediately. Then came the bullet points. My title, Senior Compliance Systems Officer, was gone, not reassigned, erased. In its place, Systems Resource, Audit, and Infrastructure Support. That's HR speak for glorified assistant with no teeth. My name was boxed in gray. Every other name on the chart had soft, inviting blues and greens. Mine looked like a gravestone. And who was I now reporting to? Dylan, 26. Just got his MBA from a school with a beach. His job title, Culture Liaison and Engagement Integrator. His job description, unclear. His experience with federal audit frameworks, 0. His TikTok presence, extensive. I didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Hands stayed folded in my lap like a woman at a funeral waiting to throw dirt. Dylan looked over at me sheepish. Hey, Patricia. Super excited to collaborate, I nodded. Not to him, to myself. The rest of the meeting was a blur of verbal kale salad. Words like flattening, autonomy, trust. Calvin made a show of calling this the Patricia model, an example of how senior talent can guide from a support position. A few chuckled. I didn't. I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. Then I opened my laptop, calmly, quietly. I downloaded Role Mapping Authority Matrix V3, internal file, restricted access, written by me 6 months prior. It contained every internal authority chain governing compliance permissions, badge roles, audit trails, and signature validators. Every node, every user, every clause. What Calvin didn't understand was this. In our org, access didn't flow from titles, flowed from configuration, from keys, from digital roles tied to federal contracts, none of which could be updated without me. I opened a terminal and ran a silent read-only trace on admin reassignments. Calvin had tried to push a permission inheritance flag, likely for himself or Dylan, but it failed. Because buried deep in our policy code was a clause labeled 14B, role ownership defined by cryptographic assignment, transferable only by named officer. That officer, yours truly. No one had ever tested that clause before, until now. As the team filed out, half apologizing with their eyes, Calvin leaned over my chair and whispered, no hard feelings, yeah? You're still the backbone, just lower on the spine. I smiled for the first time that day. Cold, precise. The kind of smile you wear when you know your opponent just walked into their own trap and thanked you for the tour. That evening, I stayed late, not out of spite, out of principle. I resynced the badge logs, updated the role status archive, and tagged all outdated security groups as deprecated. Then I opened a fresh incident report, labeled it Phase 1, Realignment, and attached my personal notes under an innocuous file name, Lunch Policy Draft V5. Let them eat snacks. I was building the paper trail that would smother them. Then I shut the lid of my laptop and walked out, bells echoing through the empty corridor like a countdown. The cage was smaller now, but it still had steel bars, and I still held the keys. They say humiliation burns hotter when served in a well-lit room with iced cucumber water. The boardroom was set like a wedding banquet, minus the joy and plus 2 extra HR reps who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The calendar invite had said transition alignment, like I was a printer cartridge getting slotted into a new tray. No context, no agenda, just my name, a time, and a location that usually meant lawsuits or layoffs. I walked in at 10:58 a.m., 2 minutes early, and every eye lifted like I'd interrupted a eulogy. The CEO, Daniel, gave a stiff nod. He was the kind of man who smiled with his chin, not his eyes. Legal counsel, Andrea, sat to his right with a leather binder clutched like a Bible during a storm. Across from them, Calvin, leaning back, one foot resting on his other knee like this was poker night. HR sat beside him, armed with support documentation and that peculiar performative warmth that always precedes a corporate execution. Patricia, Calvin chirped like we were meeting for brunch. Thanks for joining us. We wanted to align on your next chapter. Words hit like a slap delivered with silk gloves. No one offered me a seat. I pulled one out myself, slowly, deliberately, and folded my hands on the table. No pen, no notepad, just me and a silence sharp enough to peel wallpaper. Daniel cleared his throat. Calvin has brought forward some exciting operational shifts. It's all part of our organizational agility roadmap, which is why, Calvin cut in, we're thinking physical proximities and departmental clustering. To encourage organic collaboration. Andrea flipped open the binder. Inside, a single laminated floor plan, the new desk assignments, and there it was, basement level B2, desk hash 47, listed under storage overflow and legacy ops, between janitorial and printer refill. No windows, no HVAC. Just condensation, metal shelves, a view of cardboard boxes labeled Q2 2014 archive, do not shred. Calvin grinned like he'd pulled off a magic trick. You'll be closer to the paper. He even laughed at his own joke. I didn't. I turned to Andrea, studied the binder in her hands, the pages beneath the map, the tab labeled attestation credentials. Her fingers twitched slightly as she realized what I was looking at. That binder wasn't just about office, real estate. It was the quarterly compliance prep, sign-off matrices, credential attestations, audit flags. Everything that depended on one unchangeable line, named officer signature required. Calvin mistook my silence for submission. That was his first real mistake. HR jumped in. Of course, we want to make this transition feel empowering. Your contributions are still valued, Patricia. This just right-sizes things a bit, puts you in a more adaptable environment. Adaptable? Asked, voice steady. Dynamic, she corrected quickly. I glanced back at the floor plan. No mention of internet connectivity, no notation for badge scanner, no phone extension listed. No exit. Do I need to sign anything? I asked, more to Andrea than anyone else. She hesitated. Not today. This is just alignment. Meaning they wanted to push it through unofficially. Informally. Publicly, but without a paper trail. If I made a fuss, I'd look petty. If I refused, I'd be resistant to change. But if I accepted it, they'd use my silence as a consent clause. A legal shrug of the shoulders they could later point to and say she didn't object. So I did what they didn't expect. I smiled, not out of joy, out of clarity. You're right, I said quietly. It's time to realign. And with that, I stood. No outburst, no tears. Just one precise movement as I reached into my blazer and pulled out my company badge. I placed it on the table, square in the center, and slid it not to Calvin, not to HR, but to Andrea. She blinked, picked it up like it was radioactive. You'll want to update the badge system, I said. Mine's still keyed to the compliance vault. Calvin chuckled. Already done, it's on it. Andrea didn't speak. She just opened the binder again, flipped to the second tab, and there, highlighted in yellow, was the system-generated ID tag tied to the federal compliance portal. My badge, my cryptographic ID, still active, still singular, transferable, only with explicit authorization from the current named officer, which, by protocol and contract, required biometric confirmation and full disclosure to external partners. I had given neither. Thanks for the update, I said, turning to leave, looking forward to being closer to the paper. And as I walked out, I heard Daniel murmur something low to Andrea. She didn't answer, because her hands were shaking, just slightly. That binder was supposed to be ceremonial, a prop, a formality, but now it was a live wire, and they just touched it with wet hands. The basement smelled like neglect and toner ink. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead like dying flies, and the only airflow came from a dusty fan zip-tied to a support beam, oscillating with the slow defeat of someone paid hourly. My new desk, if you could call it that, was wedged between a rusted industrial shredder and a stack of expired toner cartridges marked 2016 do not open. A sticky note on the monitor read, "Good luck." With a winking face, Dylan's handwriting. I sat down, straight-backed, calm. Then I got to work. See, humiliation is only lethal if you let it break your rhythm. Mine was still intact. They'd buried me in a tomb of broken office supplies and forgotten invoices, but they forgot to revoke my tools. Worse, they forgot I designed most of them. First move, revoke dormant badges. Our system had a nasty habit of hoarding old access credentials like a digital hoarder's attic. Ex-employees, contractors, interns from 3 years ago still had live credentials buried in subfolders. I initiated a silent purge, 36 dormant IDs gone. No emails, no alerts. Just a soft internal note. Batch inactivation, routine security compliance. Logged Patricia Lang, 6:03 p.m. Second move, audit trail activations. I set up a passive listener on the admin escalation log. Every time someone tried to assign themselves higher permissions or fiddle with compliance settings, it would ping a hidden thread, my thread. Calvin, as expected, had been trying to slide in custom overrides. He used Dylan's ID to mask it, thinking the audit trail wouldn't notice proxy escalation. The system did, logged it, time-stamped it, tagged it with the memo. Unauthorized role shadow attempt escalation blocked. Third move, memo deployment. I wrote one last final version of our internal compliance guidelines. Compliance Framework V5.1, Revised Security Authority Structures. It outlined everything Calvin was trying to ignore: who could and couldn't hold keys, who could and couldn't sign federal attestations, and most importantly, the triggers for auto-notifications to external regulators in the event of a protocol breach. I emailed it to legal, HR, Calvin, Dylan, and the IT director. No response. Not even a read receipt, so I archived it, time-stamped it, saved 2 encrypted backups on offsite cold storage under personal retention policy #442B, which, by the way, still legally valid because they hadn't updated the retention framework since 2021. I wrote it. They never understood it. And now they were trying to dance around it like it wasn't booby-trapped. Meanwhile, upstairs, Calvin was holding his all-hands sinks, grinning with slide decks full of empty promises and meaningless verbs. Reimagine, elevate, streamline. Had no clue the guts of the operation were quietly detaching themselves like the bolts of an overloaded cargo plane. Every time they ignored me, I logged it. Every meeting I was excluded from, I filed under omission of officer in regulatory disclosure channels. Subtle, yes, but should a federal inquiry ever come knocking, those omissions would register as compliance gaps. And gaps meant violations, and violations meant fines. They'd laugh now, of course. Calvin probably had a new catchphrase ready. Something like, "Oh, Patricia's just clinging to legacy systems." But systems don't care about clinging. They care about state integrity. And ours, it was now in free fall. I started clearing the physical clutter in my new office, moved out the broken fax machine, consolidated the old files into one neat archive box, labeled the empty shelf with a single line of Sharpie ink. They called this a transition. And behind that, to the back panel, I placed a small USB stick, encrypted, offline, containing everything: access logs, badge map revocations, clause references, annotated frameworks, and my own private journal, a blow-by-blow of how the company stripped its only legal backbone in the name of culture. A compliance obituary, authored in real time. I left the USB there, not as a backup, but as a gravestone. Then I made one final move. I opened the admin console, scrolled to the key escrow fallback setting, the one that ensured, in the event of a full system purge, that no emergency access could be granted without a named officer override. I turned it on. No alerts, no fireworks, just a silent switch from OFF to on. Now, if they tried to reassign authority, reset credentials, or bluff their way into an attestation window, the system would stall. Not fail. Stall. Just long enough for regulators to ask the wrong question. Just long enough to break momentum. Just long enough to bleed trust. Upstairs, the office laughed, celebrated Dylan's promotion with cupcakes and those glittery email gifs. Downstairs, I watched the logs in silence. A woman stripped of her rank but not her reach. And somewhere in the wires, the system started whispering, "She's still here." It started with a Slack message at 10:14 a.m. from a junior analyst named Lewis. Bright kid, too earnest for his own good. Pinged the compliance thread with a screenshot and a polite little message. "Hey, not sure if this is a bug or just deprecated config, but the audit tool's throwing a red flag on chain authority certs. Says invalid named officer linkage. Anyone seen this before? One line, one crack." The message sat there for 6 hours. No one responded. At 3:02 p.m., the screenshot was quietly deleted by Dylan. Slack timestamp still showed Lewis posted it. The image was gone. Classic Calvin move. Don't solve the problem, scrub the evidence. Lewis didn't repost. Probably got a little career guidance in a side channel. The kind that includes phrases like visibility and optics. But systems don't forget. That same morning, the IT team logged 5 badge mismatch errors. Dylan tried accessing the compliance admin dashboard and got booted twice. Then Calvin himself triggered a failed escalation, trying to override the external audit scheduler. System responded, override denied, invalid chain of custody. IT flagged it internally, quietly, but not quietly enough. Andrea from legal finally raised her head at 4:17 p.m. and sent a curt internal memo. Can someone explain why the federal attestation keychain is flagging Patricia Lang as irreplaceable authority node? We've demoted her. Who owns this role now? Calvin's reply came 7 minutes later. Relax. It's just Patricia's old config lingering in the system. She's not even in the org chart. It's scrubbing legacy roles. 4 sentences, all wrong. Because here's the thing, org charts are HR toys. Protocols live in systems, and my digital signature wasn't a title. It was a cryptographic constant, registered, authenticated, and mutually verified with 2 federal partners. To remove it, need my biometric release and a multi-party digital signing ceremony that takes 72 hours and 3 separate compliance witnesses. But sure, Calvin, scrub away. I watched it all from my basement throne of forgotten toner. Then, at 5:01 p.m. sharp, I made the call. I logged in. Accessed the key escrow management node, buried 5 levels deep in the compliance console. Pulled up my profile, Lang, Patricia. Status, active. Primary, mutable until voluntarily revoked or legally incapacitated. I clicked delete profile. The system responded with a prompt. Are you sure? Deleting this profile will initiate the attestation reset protocol. This action is irreversible. I clicked yes. Then the real warning popped up. You are the sole named officer associated with active compliance attestation for the following contracts. Federal Transit Vendor 2A, Defense Logistics Pipeline 4C, Regional Routing Chain 3B. Deletion will require immediate reassignment and external notification per Clause 14B. Continue, I clicked yes again, then typed my passphrase. Final confirmation, Patricia Lang Delta 1472 FR. Submit. And just like that, I was gone from the system at least. No fireworks, no sounds. Just the faint hum of the server acknowledging the equivalent of a spinal cord severed. Profile was the skeleton key to every audit trail, every badge validation, every override fail-safe. Without it, Calvin and his merry band of fools would need to restart the attestation protocol from scratch, only they wouldn't know how, because I'd authored it. I'd designed it, and I'd buried its contingencies where no one would look without knowing what questions to ask. At 5:06 p.m., I shut my laptop. The room felt quieter than usual. The fan had stopped oscillating. Upstairs, they were probably finishing happy hour. Dylan toasting his culture milestone. Calvin updating his LinkedIn with another meaningless victory. HR sending out e-cards celebrating positive transition energy. But somewhere in the walls, systems were slowing down. Credentials were failing to sync. Triggers were quietly activating. Logs were building like thunderheads. In legal's inbox sat a silent anomaly. A ping from the audit portal requesting named officer confirmation. No response. The first cracks had formed. Hairline, dismissed, papered over. But cracks, if ignored, become fractures. And fractures eventually bring down towers. I leaned back in my chair. The steel groaned. My eyes were dry. My hands calm. They thought they'd buried me. They didn't realize I was still inside the walls. And I'd just pulled the first brick. It hit on a Wednesday morning. The kind of sterile midweek, quiet where nothing is supposed to happen. Emails were trickling in at half speed. The office espresso machine had overflowed, again. Dylan was running late to his own culture sprint, but tucked somewhere between a calendar invite and a cat gif from HR was an unread email that detonated everything. Subject, contract action, required vendor ID hash 882,349. Transit routing chain sender. Federal compliance at GovLink we are placing contract, hash TRC 2024 to 11B, on temporary hold, pending credential reconfirmation. Current attestation record indicates no authorized signer. Please respond within 48 hours to avoid federal breach protocol. It was just a little red flag in the corner of the screen, but it might as well have been a nuclear alarm. Calvin didn't see it first. Legal did. Andrea pinged him with a terse message. Do you know anything about a signer removal from the audit chain? Calvin's reply was his signature cocktail of ego and improvisation. Yeah, Patricia's stuff. We're cleaning it up. Dylan's stepping in. No biggie. Except it was a biggie, because when Dylan tried to log into the compliance portal to designate himself as the new named officer, the system spit him out with a rejection notice, so clear even legal couldn't spin it. Error. Transfer invalid original named officer must authorize key assignment via 14B protocol. Clause 14B. The thing I wrote. The thing they never read. Back when we built the new compliance schema, I insisted on one clause buried in the legal boilerplate, mostly as a firewall against sudden exits, or worse, bad actors. It required any replacement of the compliance signature authority to be approved in writing and in system by the current named officer. Failing that, it triggered a regulatory notice. Not optional, not editable, and not removable without triggering a full system reset, which required recertification from 3 separate federal agencies. They had no idea what they'd just walked into. HR scrambled first. Marlene, the one with too many scented pens and not enough spine, came down to the basement in a soft panic. She did her nervous knock. 3 taps, then a breath, then 2 taps. I let her stew outside the door. When I finally opened it, she was already mid-sentence. We just need a quick signature, nothing big, just updating some files. She lied with the politeness of someone trying to defuse a bomb with a spatula. Let her hand me the paper. It was laughable. A printed form stating, in generic legalese, that I formally release all credentialed authority tied to my prior role and consent to reassignment in good faith. No clause references. No audit trail. No proper countersign. I set it on the desk. Didn't sign it. Is this your idea? I asked, or Calvin's? Marlene smiled like a hostage. Just helping where I can. She left 5 minutes later, paper unsigned. I'm sweating. Upstairs, IT started to unravel. Badge mismatches were escalating. Admin tasks were failing. A junior sysadmin tried to create a workaround credential and got locked out of the override dashboard entirely. The system replied with one simple message. At a station, key removed escrow reset required. They didn't even know what that meant. At 1:47 p.m., my old Slack, still technically active through legacy permissions, pinged with a message from Dylan. Hey, what is clause 14B? Just like that, no greeting, no punctuation. Just raw desperation disguised as a question. I didn't respond, but I did take a screenshot for the file. Across the building, the mood shifted. Laughter dulled. Phones started ringing more. Andrea took 2 calls in the hallway, pacing like a woman 1 step behind a fire. The CEO, Daniel, canceled a lunch meeting. Calvin held an emergency sync that bled into a second meeting that he never left. That afternoon, a second vendor email came in. We are formally requesting clarification on the current chain of compliance authority. Our records show no valid attestation path. Please advise immediately. By 3:12 p.m., they tried again to reassign the badge. This time, they looped in Andrea directly. She tried to bypass the system through her legal override code. System replied, insufficient authorization. At a station key tethered to immutable officer profile. Manual reassignment prohibited. They could reshuffle desks. They could delete my org chart slot. They could Photoshop me out of the company holiday photo. But they couldn't sign anything, because systems don't care about office politics. They care about protocols. And mine had teeth. Downstairs, I sipped my tea and opened my private terminal. The logs were pulsing now, little red flags popping like microwave popcorn. They were starting to see the edges of the pit. But they still hadn't looked down. Yet, the meeting invite hit inboxes like a defibrillator to a dying man. Urgent, executive alignment boardroom, 8:30 a.m. No subject line fluff, no Kiersey emojis, just cold, black text and panic breathing underneath. They knew, or at least they'd finally started to. Upstairs, Calvin was already sweating through his 3rd shirt of the week. He'd shown up early, tried to corner Andrea near the elevators, mumbling something about contingency roles and informal workarounds. She didn't stop walking, didn't even look at him. By 8:32, the boardroom was full. CEO Daniel sat at the head of the table, jaw locked so tight you could have cracked walnuts on it. His tie was loose, sleeves rolled. He wasn't angry, He was cornered. Legal counsel Andrea was beside him, her audit binder already open like a funeral guest book. IT Director Nash fidgeted 2 seats down, face pale, blinking like a man about to be called to the front of the class with nothing prepared. HR was there too, arms crossed, suddenly quiet. And Calvin? Calvin was the main act. He paced near the display monitor, voice 2 octaves higher than usual, throwing out jargon like confetti. There's been a minor legacy credential inconsistency. Easily fixable. We're revalidating new authority channels to ensure seamless vendor alignment, just some bureaucratic backwash from Patricia's tenure. He gestured to the binder like it was a prop in a TED talk. Nothing we can't solve. Andrea didn't move, didn't blink. She just turned the page. Inside, slotted behind a clear plastic sleeve, was my badge. The one I'd slid to her in that same room, exactly 13 days ago. Its photo still sharp. My name etched in crisp corporate font, Lang, Patricia named officer, Federal Compliance Chain. But it wasn't just a badge, it was the badge. The one tethered directly to the company's digital attestation infrastructure. A credential with an unbreakable signature protocol, binding my identity to every quarterly report, every system validation, every vendor-facing log chain. Daniel stared at it. What happens? Ask slowly if that's not active. Andrea didn't answer right away. Instead, she slid out the accompanying credential record. Line 3, escrow profile deleted by user Patricia Langdelta, 1472 FR at 17. 01 timestamp verified. Line 6, replacement. Not permitted without named officer approval per clause 14b, line 8. Attestation path. Null. Daniel turned to Calvin. So, removed the only person with legal authority over our compliance systems during audit season? Calvin blinked. She was obstructing innovation. Andrea closed the binder with the finality of a gunshot. Without Patricia's signature, she said, you can't legally file our Q4 attestation, which means we're in breach, which means federal vendors will pull funding. Which means, she said, turning slowly to HR, just turned a personnel dispute into a material compliance failure. HR shrank into her chair like a paper flower under rain. IT Director Nash coughed. We've tried issuing a surrogate key, but the system's hard-coded to her token. It won't accept substitutes, not without her biometric sign-off, and the last backup copy we had was he trailed off. Andrea finished for him on her drive, which she wiped. Daniel leaned back, pinched the bridge of his nose. Can we just rehire her? Undo this? Andrea shook her head. Not before the audit. Even if she walked in today, the system wouldn't recognize it. The moment she deleted her escrow, the signature path severed. We'd need to start a full recertification. 6 to 8 weeks minimum. Daniel turned to Calvin, eyes heavy with something colder than rage. You told me this was a cultural pivot. You said she was dead weight. You said she was a risk. Calvin looked smaller now, less like a visionary, more like a child who knocked over a vase and blamed the cat. She never explained how critical she really was. Andrea didn't even look at him. She didn't need to, because systems don't care how loud you are. They care who built them. Back in the basement, I refreshed my private dashboard one last time. My admin access was officially gone. All my credentials revoked. No more pings, no more backdoors, but I didn't need them anymore. Upstairs, halls were closing in, and all they had left was a photo ID and a paper binder, evidence of the moment they mistook silence for surrender. The audit clock ticked louder now. Vendors were circling. The minor inconsistency Calvin swore could be patched was now a crater. And at the center of it sat one laminated badge in a plastic sleeve, my name, still glowing like a fuse they thought they could cut without consequence. And now the fire was already halfway through the wiring, came crawling first thing Thursday morning. Marlene from HR showed up again, this time without her usual scented pens or sugary optimism. She brought a retroactive clarification memo, an official-looking PDF riddled with legal fuzz, backdated 3 weeks, stating that Patricia Lang had never been formally demoted, but was on flexible assignment for departmental realignment. It was a Hail Mary wrapped in corporate vomit. Andrea read it in silence, had pen in hand. You're trying to undemote someone after deleting their org chart line, she said flatly, and after publicly announcing their transition in 3 department meetings. Marlene squirmed. It's strategic reframing. Do you think the federal auditors are going to care about your framing? Silence. Andrea pushed the memo aside like trash. You don't get to put the toothpaste back in the tube, not with a named person protocol. By 10:12 a.m., we're trying to call me. Andrea, Marlene, Nash from IT. Even Dylan, who had the gall to leave a voicemail that started with "Hey," just wanted to clear the air I didn't pick up. The calls didn't come to my personal cell anyway. Those had been scrubbed from the directory the moment Calvin signed off on my relocation. All they had were dead channels and unanswered pings. At 11:44 a.m., Andrea stood outside Daniel's office, pale and unsmiling, her hugged tight to her chest. Daniel gestured her in. Calvin was already there, slumped in the corner like a scolded dog. Daniel didn't bother with pleasantries. "Can we bluff through Q4? Andrea shook her head once. "Not unless we want the feds crawling up our VPNs with subpoenas and clipboard flashlights." "Can we delay filings?" "Andrea, we already did. Twice." "Fake a transition plan?" "Andrea, they'll demand to see Patricia's digital sign-off. Doesn't exist anymore." Daniel slammed a palm on the desk. "So we're held hostage by someone who doesn't even work here?" Andrea's tone changed, sharpened, precise. "You're not being held hostage, Daniel. You kicked her out. You mocked her. You erased her identity from the company while leaving her signature hard-coded into every binding federal attestation we've made for the past 7 years. She was never just an employee," she added. "She was the system." Daniel leaned back like he'd been gut-punched. "What now?" "We call outside counsel," so they did. By 2:15 p.m., 3 partners from a white shoe law firm were patched into a video call. One of them, a grim-faced woman named Sutton, took exactly 37 seconds to skim the documentation before leaning into her webcam. "This is bad." Andrea exhaled. "How bad?" Sutton rubbed her temple. "You're operating under a named person protocol. That means the signature can't be reassigned without original officer approval." "She's gone," Andrea said. "Then so are your filings," Sutton replied. Calvin, desperate, jumped in. "We could maybe duplicate her role, mirror it." Sutton cut him off. "You think the federal government's going to accept a forged crypto signature chain in Q4 of an election year? Do you want to explain that in front of a Senate subcommittee?" Silence. "I suggest," Sutton added, "pray she hasn't filed any whistleblower complaints. Or worse, automated triggers." Andrea's eyes darted to the binder. She hadn't even considered that. Daniel went still. "You said she wiped her access, right?" Sutton asked. Andrea nodded. "She revoked her key, deleted her escrow, removed herself clean. Then she knew exactly what she was doing," Sutton said. "You don't clean a signature path unless you want to leave a crater." Down in the basement, my desk had been cleared. Empty chair, blank monitor. The box of toner cartridges untouched. But what they hadn't realized was that my presence wasn't in the walls. It was in the architecture. They could replace my chair, my nameplate, even my Slack handle. But they couldn't replace the silent fingerprint I'd pressed into every part of that system. Key assignments, chain validations, breach protocols. They needed me now. And I was nowhere to be found. No forwarding address, no bridge to crawl across, no lifeline. At 3:47 p.m., Andrea finally sent an internal email. Subject: urgent named officer retrieval options. We are now considering outreach for third-party re-engagement. All communication must be documented and routed through legal. Do not contact Patricia Lang without approval. The message was flagged high priority. Red exclamation mark. But it didn't matter. Because by that time, I was already gone in the way a ghost leaves behind cold rooms and locked doors. And every file they opened without me was just another dead end. Their power had emptied out with my badge swipe, and they were only just realizing the lights weren't coming back on. At precisely 9:01 a.m., the system choked. It didn't crash. It didn't scream. It just refused. A silent protest written in code. The external audit had been scheduled for months. The vendor rep, lean man in an ironed blue shirt and glasses that reflected everything but expression, clicked into the portal and waited for the system handshake to initiate the Q4 at a station. Nothing. Then a single notification slid across every executive dashboard, red and final. At a station, key invalid named officer removed, compliance path terminated. The room froze. No one breathed. On screen, the federal audit protocol blinked amber, then red. Waiting officer credentials. None detected. The auditor adjusted his tie, clearly aware of the silence now weighing down the room like fog. "Who owns this badge?" he asked, holding up a laminated printout of the credential record. "My face, my name, my ID." Calvin cleared his throat, blinking faster than a turn signal. "She's no longer with the company. We restructured her out last quarter." The auditor tilted his head. "Restructured her out?" Daniel stepped in, voice tight. "Was part of a broader reorganization, intended to modernize operations." "Did the named officer approve a handoff?" Andrea opened the audit binder, slowly, as if hoping the act itself would summon mercy. She reached the section where the escrow profile once lived. Just white space now. A signed deletion timestamp burned into the page like a wound. She didn't speak. The auditor gave them the mercy of restating the obvious. The named officer deleted her credentials without a successor assigned. Your system is out of compliance. As of this minute, he tapped a key. A second window opened, displaying every contract tied to the attestation chain: government, defense, municipal transport, 3 high-volume logistics partners. Every single one of these is now frozen. You cannot operate, invoice, or deliver on these without recertification. Calvin looked like a balloon losing air in real time. Andrea closed the binder. Then she said it, quiet, brutal, unarguable. Then you restructured yourself out of legal existence. At 9:13 a.m., the vendor's legal team emailed a formal suspension of contract services. By 9:27, a second vendor pulled escrow from a live logistics order worth $4.2 million. By 10 o'clock, company's operating authority on 2 federal pipelines was listed as pending investigation in the compliance register. No one in the building spoke above a whisper. They were still pretending it could be fixed, still pretending it wasn't over. Meanwhile, 53 miles away, I was boarding a train. Not a dramatic one, no conductor in a crisp hat, just a quiet Amtrak with cracked leather seats and the faint smell of microwaved egg sandwiches. I found my window seat, sat down, set a small envelope in my lap. It was thick, the kind of envelope that usually comes with NDAs and settlement clauses, and a strained smile from someone in HR asking you to sign away the memory of every indignity. On the corner, in sharp black letters, your transition compensation is ready for review. I didn't open it, didn't need to. Money's not leverage when the whole system was built by your hands and collapsed with your silence. Outside the window, world blurred by trees and power lines and people with places to be. For the first time in years, I wasn't on call, wasn't responsible, wasn't accountable for anyone's bad decision but my own. I sipped lukewarm coffee from a station kiosk cup, watched the sun rise over a field of dying corn, smiled. They had erased me from their charts, their memos, their walls. But you don't delete what holds the key. You just delay your own collapse. One badge, one clause, one woman they mistook for a paper pusher. And now the building was still standing, but everything inside was on fire, and I never even had to raise my voice. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button, or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco.